The dropship hit atmosphere like a fist hitting a table, and I grabbed the overhead strap with both hands and held on. Outside the small porthole beside my seat, Velketh 4 was burning. Not burning the way a forest fire burns, slow and spreading and almost beautiful from a distance. Burning the way a city burns when someone has decided, with cold and total certainty, that the city should no longer exist. Orange columns of smoke rose into the upper clouds. Somewhere below those clouds, 11 species of alien beings were barricaded in a silver station, waiting to die. I had 8 Marines. I almost laughed. I didn't, because I was the ranking NCO, and laughing at this point would have been unprofessional. But the feeling was there, familiar and warm, like running into an old friend in a bad neighborhood. My name is Gunnery Sergeant Mara Okafor, and I have been doing impossible things for the better part of 15 years. Not because I am extraordinary, not because the Marine Corps selected me for some rare genetic gift or supernatural talent, because the Marine Corps selected me for the same reason it selects everyone it keeps. I do not stop. That is the whole secret. That is, as far as I can tell, the whole secret of our species, and the galaxy has not yet figured it out. We punched through the cloud layer and I got my first real look at the ground. The Conclave observation station was a ring of silver towers, connected by elevated walkways, and it had been, by all accounts, one of the most beautiful structures in this region of space. The Velhara had built it 300 years ago as a place where different species could meet, without the complicated business of whose ship was whose, and whose gravity was whose. It had hosted diplomatic summits, scientific exchanges, and once, apparently, a concert performed by a Drassic choir that had lasted 9 days. Now, it was partially collapsed and surrounded. The Kreth moved in organized columns below us, 8-limbed and enormous, their chitinous armor catching the firelight. Each one was roughly the size of a light armored vehicle. They moved the way things move when they have never lost, with patience, with certainty, with absolute mechanical confidence. Their siege formation was textbook. I could see it even from altitude. Overlapping fields of coverage, coordinated advance, no gaps, no hesitation. Corporal Adeyemi, who we all called Bishop because he had once spent 6 hours talking a warlord out of a hostage situation using only philosophy, leaned across the aisle and looked out my porthole. He studied the formation below for about 4 seconds. "Lots of them," he said. "Yes," I said. "Good odds for us?" I looked at him. He was completely serious in the way that only Bishop ever was, which was to say he appeared to be asking a genuine question. "Outstanding odds," I said. He nodded and sat back. Private Ewan, across from him, caught my eye and grinned. We hit the turbulence zone above the fire columns, and the ship started throwing us around like dice in a cup, and nobody screamed or prayed. 7 other human beings in scorched armor, bouncing through a burning sky toward several hundred enemy combatants on an alien world, and the loudest sound in the ship was Bishop humming something to himself. The dropship took a hit from ground fire somewhere over the crystalline forest, 2 kilometers from the station. We lost the port engine. The pilot, Sergeant Voss, did what good pilots do. She kept the nose up and found the flattest piece of ground available and put us down on it, hard, in a shower of shattered crystal and soil. The ship slid for 30 meters and stopped against something solid. Silence. Then Bishop said, "Everyone good?" 7 voices confirmed they were good. I had a ringing in my left ear and what felt like a bruised rib, and I confirmed I was good too. We were out of the ship in under 2 minutes, gear loaded, moving through the crystal forest while it burned around us. The trees here were extraordinary. I had read about them in the mission brief, but reading about them was nothing like being among them. They grew in columns of translucent mineral, 15 to 20 meters tall, and when the fire reached them they did not burn slowly. They exploded, sending fragments in every direction, each one catching the light and scattering it into 1,000 directions at once. Moving through the burning crystal forest was like moving through the inside of a firework. It was also cover. The Kreth could not see us. Their targeting systems, I had been told, were calibrated for open field engagement. This close, chaotic, shrapnel-filled landscape of heat and light and shattered crystal was not something their doctrine addressed. Human doctrine, such as it is, addresses everything by addressing nothing specifically. We train for the plan falling apart. We train for the situation that has no procedure, because in our history, situations with no procedure have appeared with remarkable regularity, and the species that survived them were the ones that could think sideways. We went through the burning forest rather than around it. Sareth found us at the edge of the tree line, where the open ground began and the station's outer wall rose 50 meters ahead. He was Velhara, tall, silver-furred, with the kind of bearing that comes from belonging to a species that has been among the stars for 6,000 years. He was crouched behind a collapsed section of outer wall with 2 surviving soldiers, and the expression on his face when we stepped out of the fire was something I still think about sometimes. He had expected no one to come, or he had expected someone larger. He composed himself quickly. "Human," he said, "you came through the burning zone." "It was faster," I said. He looked at the 8 of us. He looked back at the fire. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Then he told us the tactical situation in careful, precise detail. The Kreth had breached 2 outer access points. The surviving alien representatives were in the lower levels. The station's own security forces were down to less than a dozen, and the main assault was expected within 4 to 5 hours. "Any weaknesses?" I asked. Sareth thought. "They are entirely predictable," he said, as though this were a neutral observation rather than the most important thing he had told me. "Then we're fine," I said. He stared at me. I was already moving toward the station wall. Inside, the surviving alien representatives were gathered in the station's main lower hall, and the scene was something I was not entirely prepared for despite 15 years of service. The most powerful species in this region of the galaxy, beings that could crack moons and fold space and outlive civilizations, were sitting on the floor of a damaged room, looking like refugees. Ambassador Savith of the Velhara stood when I entered. He was 3 centuries old, and it showed, not in weakness but in a kind of deep stillness, the way very old trees are still. He looked at me the way you look at something when you are trying to recalculate what you thought you knew. "How many are coming behind you?" he asked. "It's just us," I said. The room went very quiet. Counselor Drix of the Drassic, enormous, armored, physically capable of bending steel with his bare hands, made a small sound, not a word, just a sound. 3 meters of alien predator, and the sound was not confidence. I did not take offense. If I had been sitting in that room, I might have made the same sound. "We have 4 hours, I said. "Walk me through the station layout." We spent those 4 hours working. My squad moved through the station with the controlled, almost cheerful focus that comes from training so deep it lives in the body rather than the mind. Bishop wired charges along 3 corridor intersections, one-handed, his dislocated shoulder wrapped and braced, after Ewan had helped him reset it. Private Torres mapped every ventilation shaft in the lower levels, and packed the ones facing the primary breach point with crystal fragments she had carried in from the forest in her pack, because she had thought ahead, even while we were being shot at on the way down. I rerouted the station's reactor coolant to 3 secondary corridors. I repurposed the fire suppression system, because it turned out the foam it used contained a chemical compound that, according to information Sareth provided, overwhelmed the pheromone-sensitive vision the Kreth used for close-range targeting. I killed every light source in the building and wired them to a single trigger. When I explained what I was doing, piece by piece, to Sareth, he watched me with an expression I could not fully read on a Velhara face. At one point he said, quietly, "We have studied your species for 30 years. We did not expect this." "What did you expect?" I asked, not stopping work. He was quiet for a moment. "Something more straightforward," he said. I smiled at the wall I was working on. "We're a complicated people," I said. Scholar Own of the Orathi found me in a corridor 2 hours before the assault, which surprised me because Oon had not moved from behind the food storage unit since we arrived. The Orathi were ancient, physically fragile, and possessed of abilities that bent the rules of space in ways I did not fully understand. Oon was also, apparently, 4,000 years old, which meant that by the time human beings were building their first cities, Oon was already middle-aged. Oon looked at me for a long moment. "You are preparing to fight," Oon said. "Yes," I said. "You are not frightened." I thought about this honestly. "I'm frightened," I said. "I'm just not stopping." Unin considered this. "In 4,000 years, Unan said slowly. I have encountered many species. I have watched empires form and dissolve. I have seen great power used and wasted. A pause. I have never encountered a species that treats fear the way your kind does, as though it is a companion you have accepted, rather than a wall that stops you. I did not know what to say to that, so I went back to work. The Kreth came at midnight, station time. 3 breaching parties, simultaneous, perfectly coordinated. Hundreds of soldiers moving in the doctrine-perfect formation of a species that had never needed to improvise because their doctrine had never failed. I killed every light in the building. What followed is difficult to describe in sequence because it did not happen in sequence. It happened the way real fights happen, in fragments, in the dark and the noise and the chemical foam and the smoke of charges going off and the scatter of crystal fragments through ventilation shafts. My squad moved through it the way we had trained, which is to say, we moved through the chaos as though it were a familiar neighborhood, as though we had lived there our whole lives, as though disorder were our native environment. Which, if you look at human history honestly, it is. I remember UN running toward a cluster of Kreth soldiers who had lost targeting in the foam and the dark, running toward them while laughing, and the soldiers scattering because nothing in their 6,000 years of military doctrine had prepared them for something that ran toward them while laughing. I remember Bishop, one arm in a sling, charging a flank position as a diversion so Torres and Adeyemi could come around the rear. When it was over, Counselor Drix was standing beside him with a piece of structural beam in both hands, armor dented, having followed him in because he had watched a human being with a broken arm charge into certain danger, and something in Drix had simply stood up and moved. Bishop looked at him and said, "There you are," like he had been expected. I remember the foam flooding the main corridor, and the Kreth in it, going still as their targeting failed, and the sound of my own breathing in my helmet, very calm, the way it always goes calm in the middle of things. And then Onan folded space. I did not see it. I was in a different corridor, what I was told later, by Sereth, in the careful, precise way he described things. One moment, there were 40 Kreth soldiers advancing on the lower hall, and then there was a sound that had no comparison, and they were gone. Pocket dimension, as close as the translation could get. Un had not used the ability in 800 years. Political convention, Sereth explained. The display of that kind of power was considered an act of aggression in Arathi culture, in formal diplomatic settings. Torres had been on fire at the time, dragging a wounded Velhara soldier out of a collapsed section of corridor and refusing to let go. Un had watched this for approximately 10 seconds and then reconsidered the cultural convention. The Kreth general contacted me an hour into the battle. Her name was Kethra, and she had fought 47 campaigns and never lost one, and she came to the communication channel alone, which was not in the doctrine at all. "I want to understand," she said. No preamble, the directness of someone who has run out of patience for indirection. "Understand what?" I said. I was eating a protein bar. I had not eaten in 9 hours. "Your methods," she said. "Your soldiers, what you are." I thought about it while I chewed. "We don't have methods," I said. "Not really. We have training, and then we have improvisation, and then we have stubbornness." "Why do you not stop?" she asked. It was a genuine question. I could hear it, not a taunt. A question from a being who had spent her entire life in a military tradition, built on the understanding that everything, eventually, stops. "Because we're human," I said. "It's what we do." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she withdrew her forces. All of them. Not a defeat in any tactical sense she could write into a report. A reassessment. An acknowledgement that a variable had appeared in her calculations that she did not have a formula for. The sun came up on Velketh 4 about 6 hours later, and I sat outside the station and watched it. The crystal trees that had survived were throwing light everywhere, tiny rainbows scattered across the burned ground. Torres was in the station's medical bay, expected to recover. Everyone else was accounted for, battered, exhausted, and in the case of Bishop, already asleep against an exterior wall with his helmet over his face. Savith sat beside me, 3 centuries old, silver-furred, a being who had outlasted dynasties, and he sat beside a tired human sergeant in scorched armor, and watched an alien sunrise, and was quiet for a long time. "We called for power," he said finally. "We hoped for fleets. We hoped for something that would frighten the Kreth by existing." I drank my coffee, real coffee. I had packed it specifically for this. "We got something different," he said. "Something I do not have a word for. We borrowed one of yours." He paused. "Grit." I did not answer. The sun kept rising. The rainbows moved across the burned ground, slow and quiet. We are not the oldest things out here. We are not the strongest or the largest or the most gifted. The galaxy is full of species that have forgotten more than we have ever learned, that carry power we have not begun to understand, that look at us the way you look at something young and still finding its footing. But none of them sent anyone through the fire. We did. That is the whole story, really. Every time, throughout our entire history, on every world, and in every war, and in every burned and broken place we have ever found ourselves, someone has looked at the fire, and then looked at us, and decided the fire was the safer option. And every time, we have walked through it anyway. Not because we are not afraid, we are afraid. Every single time. Fear is the companion we have learned to travel with, the passenger we no longer argue with, the voice we hear and note and continue past. We continue. That is the gift and the burden and the defining fact of our species. We do not possess the longest lives, or the deepest history, or the greatest natural power in this galaxy. We possess, in quantities that apparently surprise everyone who encounters us, the simple and unremarkable and absolutely relentless refusal to be finished. Somewhere above us, the Velhara relief fleet was breaking through the blockade. Somewhere in the station, Bishop was snoring. Torres would wake up in 2 days, ask if we won, and be annoyed she had missed the end. I finished my coffee and watched the alien sun climb higher and thought about nothing in particular. It had been, all things considered, a very good morning.